Hi everybody and welcome back to Chapter 9. So we've already learned how to graph parabolas when the equations are in vertex form, but the second form that we've really concentrated on in this chapter is standard form. So today we're going to learn how to graph parabolas when the equations look like this: y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. We're still going to need to determine whether our parabola opens up or down. So just like before, we look at the leading coefficient, or the first number, the number by the x squared, to determine that. If your a is positive, then your parabola opens up. And if your a is negative, then your parabola opens down. So the same rule as before, your a determines the direction. If we look at this example, the invisible leading coefficient would be a 1, which is a positive number, which is why we know our parabola faces up for this graph. Now the vertex of your parabola has two parts. You're going to need an x, which we usually call your h, and you're going to need a y, which we usually call your k. Now in this problem, it's not quite as easy as just looking at some of the numbers in the equation to figure these out. We're going to actually have to do some calculations. So to calculate your h, you're going to use the formula b over 2a. Sorry, negative b over 2a. There we go. What that means is you're going to take the numbers from in here, the b and the a, and you're going to plug them in here to calculate the number for your h. Then, in order to get your k, you're just going to plug in the h to the equation. So once you know the x coordinate, the h, you're just going to plug it in to get the y. Now your axis of symmetry, same as before, is always going to go through your vertex. So it's going to start with x equals, because it's a vertical line, and then you're going to use the same number you calculated here to put it here, because it's going to pass through the same x coordinate as your vertex. And the y coordinate is actually easier for this one. In the previous problems that we looked at, in order to figure out the y-intercept, you needed to plug in x is 0. But in this problem, because the first term has an x squared and the second term has an x, when you plug in 0, those two terms are both going to become zeros. So all that's going to be left is the c. So when you plug in x is 0, your y-intercept will always end up being just your c value. So let's take a look at an example where we're going to use this process to figure out how to graph one of these functions. So, problem number 1. First, we need to determine whether our graph is going to open up or down. Now in this example, the a, the leading coefficient, is a 2. So because that is positive, our parabola is going to open up. Now in order to figure out the vertex, there are two components. We're going to need an h and we're going to need a k. So to figure out your h, you're going to use the formula negative b over 2a. Now in this problem, the b is negative 8. So we're going to have negative 8 over 2 times the a, which is 2. Now negative 8 is positive 8. 2 times 2 is 4. And when I simplify that, I get 2. Once you have your h, to figure out your k, you're just going to take this number and plug it into your equation. So you're going to have 2 parentheses, and instead of x, you're going to have 2, the number you just calculated, squared, minus 8, and instead of x, you're going to have 2, the number you just calculated, and then plus 6. So when I calculate that, I get negative 2. So my vertex would be located at 2, comma, negative 2. Now my axis of symmetry is always going to pass through the same x value as my vertex. So this same x value will be here as part of my equation for my axis of symmetry. And my y-intercept is always just the last number in the equation, the c, which in this case is a 6. So now we're going to graph, and we're going to treat this just like a checklist, which is the same thing we did last time. Let's start with the vertex. So the vertex is going to be located at 2, -2, and we're going to start there. Our axis of symmetry is going to be a dotted line that goes through the vertex. So I graphed that. And my y-intercept is going to be 6. So I graphed that. So now I'm going to do the buy one, get one free, which is the same thing I did last time. Because our graph is symmetric and because we know that there's a point that's 2 spaces to the left of the axis of symmetry, we can also say that there's going to be another point that is 2 spaces to the right of the axis of symmetry. Finally, I'm just going to draw my parabola. And that's my graph. Okay, so next what we're going to do is we're going to try another example. So in this problem, we're going to try to start with whether we open up or down. Now in this problem, the invisible leading coefficient is a -1. So because that number is negative, our parabola is going to open down. Next, we're going to try to figure out the vertex. Now our vertex has 2 components. It has an h and it has a k. So to figure out my h, I'm going to use the formula -b over 2a. If I'm looking at this equation, I'm noticing that there are only 2 terms. The first term has a -1x squared and the second term has a plus 4x. That means the term that's missing is the c, which is at the end. So I'm going to write in that invisible 0. That helps me understand that the b here is a 4 and the a here is a -1 so that I can fill them into this equation. Finally, I'm going to have -4 divided by -2, which gives me 2. Now to calculate my y-coordinate, my k, I'm going to take this 2 and I'm going to plug it into the original equation. So I'm going to have negative and then parentheses 2 squared plus 4 and then parentheses 2. So my final answer would be 4. So my x-coordinate of my vertex is 2 and my y-coordinate of my vertex is 4. Now my axis of symmetry is always going to start with x equals because it's a vertical line, and it's the same x value from my vertex because it's going to pass through the vertex. And finally, the y-intercept will be 0, and I know that because the final number here, the c, is an invisible 0. It wasn't there, but I knew it was a 0. So now I'm going to graph. I'm going to start with my vertex. It's going to go through the point 2, 4, and I'm going to put a point there. Next, I'm going to graph my axis of symmetry. So that's going to go through the vertex. It's going to be a dotted line that divides the graph into 2 sides that look the same. My y-intercept will be 0, and buy one, get one free. So if there's a point that is located 2 spaces to the left of this line, then there's a point that's located 2 spaces to the right of that axis of symmetry line. So finally, I'm just going to graph my parabola, which is going to look like this. And there we go. Now it does face down, which is good because I knew that it was supposed to. And at that point, I'm finished. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you guys in class tomorrow for some practice.